Please take out your chumashim, and you don't especially need a chumash, but nevertheless, even if you take out your siddur, it's also good enough. But if you take out your chumashim, it's even better. And that is as follows. In this week, the coming week Sedra, and that is in Parsha Shelach. And even though the Bnei Eretz Yisrael read already Parsha Shelach, if we have any of Bnei Eretz Yisrael listening, but whatever the case is, the fact is that the Bnei Eretz Yisrael read already Parsha Shelach. The Bnei Chutz La'aretz, we in Melbourne haven't yet read Parsha Shelach, but we're going to start learning Parsha Shelach today. We started to learn Mirza Hashem to read Parsha Shelach the coming Shabbos, so we're sandwiched in, as mentioned earlier. And actually, we have something very much in common this week with the Bnei Eretz Yisrael. A friend of ours, of all of ours, brought to my attention this morning that being that Mergein zum Zumer, because last week's Shabbos candle lighting was 4:49, and the coming week's candle lighting is 4:50. So we're heading towards summer. So we have in common with Eretz Yisrael, it's summer there, and we're heading towards summer, even though we're winter, but we're heading towards summer. All righty, get ready. Get your shorts ready. All good. We're moving on. Yeah. So in the end of Parsha Shelach, we're going to discuss an Indian tonight, which some of you may have heard this discussion earlier, and some of may have participated in this topic. And if you remember it, that's wonderful. And if you don't, so it's a wonderful review. And we have some additions and some subtractions. We got to move. All righty. So in Parsha Shelach, at the end, we talk about mitzvahs tzitzis. And we say this daily in our Sedra, in our Krishma. And we read about the Parshas Vayomer in Parshas Tzitzis. And there we talk in the Parshas Tzitzis. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, that's Kapitel Tezvav. I'm reading from the Chumash, Kapitel Tezvav, Posuk Lamed Ches, chapter 15, verse 38. The Torah says, V'amarta aleim v'osu lahem tzitzis, v'yomer Hashem al Moshe Leimer. Dabra b'nei Yisrael v'amarta aleim v'osu lahem tzitzis al kanfe v'gdeim l'deiroisam, v'nosnu al tzitzis, hakonov psil Techeiles. You should place on the tzitzis hakonov psil Techeiles, and I'll translate that for you, for those who would like the translation. That is your Ashkol Chumash. Hashem says, speak to the children of Israel and say to them that they shall make themselves tzitzis on the corners of the garments throughout their generations. And they shall place upon the tzitzis of each corner a thread of turquoise wool. All right, that's the way they translate Techeiles, turquoise. All righty, we'll soon see why. Now, Rashi tells us as follows. Take a look at the Rashi. Rashi says Techeiles, that's the shade of the wool. We don't know what that shade, that dye is meant to come from. So Rashi tells us and teaches us that the dye is coming Tseva Yorek Shel Chilazon. It brings the Gemara in Masechta Menachos Daf Mem Beis Amud Beis, and has translated in the Art Scroll Rashi. If you don't have one, I'll share it with you. Techeiles says Rashi, turquoise wool. Tseva Yorek Shel Chilazon, the greenish dye of the Chilazon. Greenish. Rashi says Yorek. Okay? So therefore they say greenish, and they explain why. According to the Talmud, the Chilazon is a marine creature, and reading their notes, the color of the sea, whose blood is used to make the Techeiles dye. Now he says all the Techeiles is often translated as blue wool. It is rendered turquoise wool here in accordance with Rashi's description, because Rashi says Tziva Yorek. So it's the color of the sea at certain times of the day, that it's not dafka the sky blue, it's sometimes greenish. Right, that's turquoise, and that's why actually in certain midrashim it says, even though the Gemara says Yam doime l'rakia, but rakia doime Techeiles. Techeiles is doime l'yam, Yam doime l'rakia, rakia doime l'kisei hakovet. So it seems to be the sapphire stone, it's the sapphire color, etc., etc. It's blue, the sky blue, etc. Nevertheless, there's certain midrashim which say that it's doime l'asabim, it's doime l'doime, like Rashi brings sometimes. It's not mamash identical to the sky blue. It's like a bit off, etc., etc. So anyway, that's this turquoise, which the Art Scroll brings to our attention. The fact is that speaking of the Chilazon, Techeiles, which has to be from the Chilazon, interestingly, what it says in the Chumash. In the Chumash, there's an Arachaim HaKodesh, which is also found in different midrashim and in different meforshim. And he says, if you take a look at the pasuk, it says as follows. He says, there's a word lidoi roisam. Hashem says you should make tzitzis on the corners of the garment lidoi roisam for your generations. And then after the pasuk, after the word l'deroisim, it says v'nosnu al tzitzis hakon of psil Techeiles. The Techeiles is mentioned after l'deroisim, and the Rechaim HaKodesh asks, usually the details of the mitzvah are found at the end. So first the pasuk should have presented the whole of the mitzvah, meaning the tzitzis and the Techeiles, and then tell us that it should be l'deroisim for generations. So the Rechaim says an interesting expression. Some modern Lashon, but he says it as follows: "V'nischakem Hashem, nischakem." Melashon chochmet is gechochmet. Okay, v'nischakem Hashem v'omar l'deroisim koidem zikorin Techeiles. Before he mentions the Techeiles, it says l'deroisim loymar to tell us shahalavon l'deroisecha, the love on the white strands of the tzitzis for generations. Abel Techeiles, but the Techeiles, the blue dye, the turquoise blue, k'she'enoi benimtza. When it's not available, and chiyuv boy, there's no chiyuv to have it. And as the Gemara says, "V'agam she'atcheles ein makibes halovon, v'loy halovon es atcheles." One is not essential to the other. Afal became. The fact is, he says, "Halovon hu benimtza l'deres." The love on the white tzitzis we have throughout the generations. V'loy hefsik, without any it was continuous. Masha'enken atcheles, the Techeiles is not continuous. So that is what says the Rechaim HaKodesh is alluded in relation to the Techeiles, and we don't have Techeiles nowadays. Nevertheless, we know very well, and it's very popular. I'm telling you what's popular. You see, it's quite popular. It's become actually stylish. See the guys that are hanging around, it's become a style today. Guys are hanging around with their long tzitzis, shooting all over the place. It looks like it's in style with all the rest of the stuff in style today. Anyway, if you like it, take it. But b'chal oifim, so they have your tzitzis flying around. Now you also have the fellows flying around with their tzitzis, and you see the ones with the Techeiles. So it's also become quite a style thing. It's an in thing. Call it what you like. The tzitzis are flying all over the place, and it's nice. And take it. Excuse me. No comment. Next. And the blue tzitzis, the Techeiles, is also all over the place. Okay. Now it's known, as we all know, that in 1887 the Radziner Rebbe, right, Rabbi Gershon Henoch Leiner from Poland, studied this whole thing, and he was a big Lamdan and a big Gaon. He wrote a known Chibur Sidrei Taras on Kalim and all those big Lamdish Svarim, and he investigated and studied through this whole sugya of Techeiles, and he wanted to renew. He claimed. He then traveled to Italy, and he then he claimed, based on all his investigation, etc., based on the Lamdis, and went through all the Chazals and all the Gemaras and all the Rambams and all the Inyanim and the Midrashim, and he claimed that, he figured out more or less what the regulations are, and he traveled to Italy, and he identified in his mind, that was the inkfish, I believe, or whatever it was. Check it out. It's all recorded in many different Svarim, and that was in 1887. He penned 3 Svarim from there on, 3 Svarim, Svunei Tmunei Chayil and Techeiles, and which another sefer. 3 Svarim he penned in relation to that, discussing it all. That was in the days of Rabbi Gershon Henoch, where he wanted to renew, and he actually, not just did he, by 1889, he actually introduced the method, and he manufactured it, and he had it all done, and they started to implement to wear the Techeiles, and many of his Chassidim followed him, and he sent it off to Eretz Yisrael, and he sent it around. Many accepted it, many didn't. As known, in 1913, I'm reading just like cut and paste of an appendix in the Art Scroll Gemara. If you have an Art Scroll Gemara, Masechta Menachos, an appendix to Daf Mem Dalid, where the Gemara discusses there the of Techeiles and Mem Beis, Mem Dalid, 44 and 42. 44 actually, 44a. So there's an appendix there which has like a brief synopsis of the history behind those who wanted to renew the of Techeiles. So they bring all the details about the Radziner. Then they bring in 1913 that Rav Herzog, the chief rabbi, was a big Gaon and a big Lamdan. So also he disagreed with what the Radziner identified the Techeiles to be, the dye, the Chilazon, in other words. And he identified it in a different way, and he proved scientifically that his may be right and the Radziner may be wrong, etc., etc. And they go on to say in this article that in recent years it's become renewed. There's a renewed interest in the Techeiles. Many people studied it and bring it and do it and wear it, etc., etc. So if you want, like I say, there's a brief synopsis with a lot of references of different books and foreign publications who actually go through it thoroughly, and it's actually a fascinating study and a fascinating read. about what's going on, about the history of the renewal of the Techeiles from the Radzina onwards, when it ended and when it started, etc. Even though for decades, so to speak, for hundreds of years, it wasn't available for the Klal Yisrael. Nevertheless, he wanted to renew it, and he was successful to a degree, at least to specific circles. Definitely for the Radzina, and I saw Rav Zevin say, he says that's the Radzina Chassidim and also the Breslov Chassidim. That's what Rav Zevin quotes. If that's a fact, I'm unsure, but I believe it is so. And now, interestingly, the son of the Radzina Rebbe sent his father Svorim to the Rebbe Rashab, to the fifth Lubavitcher Rebbe, to the Rebbe Nishma Seiden, known as the Rebbe Nishma Seiden, the Rebbe Rashab, and Tofrei Samach Zayin. And the Rebbe Nishma Seiden writes him back that he thanks him very much, that he honors him with his father's Svarim. He sent him all of his Svarim, the Sidri Taris and the Svarim on Techeiles. He says, nevertheless, he says, I appreciate, because I wanted to see and invest, to see his Svarim and explore what he says. Nevertheless, he says, to follow, to accept what he wants, that I can't in any way, I cannot accept and agree to him. For this plain reason, he says, being that the Alter Rebbe writes on the Torah, this is what the Rebbe Nishma Seiden, the fifth Rebbe, writes. He was a direct descendant of the Alter Rebbe, but being that he's a Rebbe of Chabad, so he says, being that the Alter Rebbe writes on the Torah in the Parsha, in Parsha Shelach, and he identifies the Drush, and he writes there that he quotes the Pri Eitz Chaim, the words of the Arizal says, Bizman hazeh, nowadays there is no Techeiles. And actually, the Arizal connected to the Churban Beis Hamikdash, so it's also dealt with and discussed exactly what that is. And actually, the Radzina deals with this Arizal, but the Rebbe Nishma Seiden says there's nothing to talk about, because once the Alter Rebbe quotes this Arizal, that's the end. That's the end statement. That's where it ends, and therefore there's nothing to talk about. And then he also adds that the Tzemach Tzedek in the glosses on that mimer substantiates the statement of the Alter Rebbe in the name of the Arizal, which seems to say that he actually agrees that it's no way to have it once after until Bizman Hazeh, nowadays, until Mashiach comes, we don't have the Techeiles. And nevertheless, at the end of the letter, and he goes and discusses different issues which the Radzina raises in the Sefer, and the Rebbe Rashab reconciles them, and he says then a non-issue in relation to Tefillin or whatever. And then he says the way the Radzina describes the Chilazon in the Maimer, in the Sefer Psil Techeiles, he says, if I recall correctly, 20 years ago, when I visited Berlin and I was in the aquarium, I saw the aquarium in Berlin. I saw a small creature, which it is secretion from time to time of the saliva, which is black, which blackened the water around it. And he says it seemed to possibly. He says he didn't pay attention because he didn't think that it may identify with the Chilazon. But he says the way the Radzina describes it, he may have seen it in the aquarium in Berlin. He just mentions this to his son. And with that he ends, and he says he should have Hatzlacha in all the Inyanim. And after that, just also to mention that the Rebbe Schusi Yogan Aleinu, the Lubavitcher Rebbe Schusi Yogan Aleinu in 1958, in Igris Kodesh Chelik Yud Zayin, page 232, someone inquires also about the Chilazon and the Techeiles, and the Rebbe says it's known here issue al zeh hisnagdol azeh. There was a big tumult about it. Some agreed and some disagreed, and it also, according to halacha, the greats discussed it when this novel Chidush came out from the Radzina, and he says he quotes the Rebbe Rashab did not agree to this novel. Newly invention of the Radzina. In no way did he agree to him. The Rebbe says even though he doesn't have the letter in front of him, nevertheless he recalls that the Rebbe Rashab writes that according to the Kabbalah, the inyan of the Techeiles will be only when Mashiach will come. And therefore the Rebbe concludes we have to follow with the words of the Rebbe Rashab, Onu ein lanu ele divrei kedushas admon nishma seiden. So let me let you know, if you're a Chabad Chosid and you follow with the Rebbe's guidance, you will never wear Techeiles in your tzitzis, even if it becomes popular and it's in style and it's the in thing, and you want to be Mekarav Yidden, but you're not going to influence them to wear Techeiles. You're not going to wear Techeiles until Moshiach Tzidkenu will come. That's for that. Let me also conclude with an interesting statement of what I found, which I saw referenced actually in the Sefer from Rabbi Yehoshua Ber Soloveitchik from Boston, Rav Soloveitchik, Olav Hasholem, where he quotes in his Shiurim, in his Sefer Shiurim Lezecher Abba Morizal, that's Chelik Aleph, page 228. So there he quotes, he says, it's known what the discussion, the deliberation, my grandfather, and his grandfather was the Beis Halevi, Rabbi Yehoshua Ber, the first Rabbi Yehoshua Ber Soloveitchik, between him and the Rebbe of Radzin about Techeiles and Tzitzis. And the Rebbe Radzin was Mechadish and commanded his Chassidim to put Techeiles in their Tzitzis, and he tried to prove it in all different ways that the truthfulness of the Techeiles. But Rabbi Yehoshua Ber Soloveitchik, the first Rabbi Yehoshua Ber, the Beis Halevi, argued and said that he says all proofs and all analysis are not good enough to prove a thing which relates to the Messiah. In other words, if there was no Messiah, right? We have no Messiah going back for generations that this is it. In other words, this is the actual Chilazon, and this is the way we're meant to produce the dye and manufacture the dye, and this is mamashit. So therefore, no svara and no logic and no analysis can do anything if there's no Messiah, if we don't have something from our ancestors about it. And therefore, because it's something new, we can accept it. He says, therefore, that's the way our ancestors did, that's the way they kept and they followed, and that's the way the descendants have to follow. So therefore, he just approached it from a total different angle, why it can be based on that principle, but Al Kopani didn't accept it. Nevertheless, like I say, take a look at this appendix in the Art Scroll Gemara, which he has like up-to-date, different interesting svarim and articles which analyzed and discussed it, and like I say, many do follow it. Also, I haven't seen reference, but if you have, or if you know of, a sefer called Divrei Menachem from Rav Menachem Mendel Kasher, in Techeiles-Chilazon is Divrei Menachem Chelik Aleph Siman Gimel. He has also a very nice historical background and information on it, with a fair bit of lumdus on the singing, and also even more, a more extensive article in a sefer called Ira Kodesh VaHamikdash from Rabbi Yechiel Michal Tukushinsky from Yerushalayim in Chelik Hey, Perik Hey. There he also has a lengthy, extensive discussion about the Chilazon and the Techeiles and the Radzina, etc. We're moving on. So being that Rashi says that the tzitzis are from the Chilazon, so therefore we're not going to discuss the Chilazon per se, and we're not going to discuss the shita of the Techeiles at all. We're not going to go there, even though, like I say, it's fascinating. I'm going to just attempt to present, it's already 10 to 9, present to you what the Rogatchover has a very fascinating take on the source of the Chilazon, where it is and what it is, and therefore for the Techeiles, and therefore he actually mentions this, even though I haven't found or searched, actually. I haven't searched to see if he addresses the Radziner's shita of the nowadays, if there's Techeiles, or he's dealt with it, or he has been outspoken about it. Nevertheless, there is a statement in the text which we will deal with, which based on his analysis of what he says, as we will talk about it in Mirza Hashem this evening, and we're going to get there any moment, he makes it very clear that it's very problematic to identify the Chilazon. Very problematic. Okay, and we're moving on. Now, to realize that Rashi says here that the Chilazon is in the tzitzis, and it's referenced, like we say, the Gemara in Menachos. Rashi also follows this opinion in Chumash in relation to because we find that the Techeiles is also needed in the Mishkan, and that is right. We find at the beginning of Parshas Truma, the Torah says that you should give the donations, and it says Techeiles v'argoma v'salah shoni v'sheish v'izim, right? So Techeiles is mentioned right in the beginning of Parshas Truma, what is meant to be donated for the Mishkan, for the tabernacle. Techeiles is mentioned, and also Techeiles is mentioned throughout that they actually donated the Techeiles. We find it throughout Parshas Vayakhel that they gave it for the Bigdei Kahuna. It was needed for the Bigdei Kahuna. It was also needed for the priestly garments. It was also needed for parts of the actual tabernacle, of the actual Mishkan, and that was for the Paroiches and the Urios, etc. Read through Parshas Vayakhel, you'll see it's all there. So Techeiles is mentioned throughout, and Rashi mentions Techeiles. Take a look at the Rashi. In Parsha Chof Hey, Pasuk Dalet, Rashi makes it very clear. Techeiles, says Rashi, Semer Tzavua B'dam Chilazon B'tziva Yoroik. He makes it clear two things. Number one, he says that where it says Techeiles and the Chumash by the Bigdei Kehuna and the Mishkan, also there it has to be dyed with the blood of the Chilazon. He mentions there Chilazon like by the tzitzis, and also he says V'tziva Yoroik, and also he uses the same green. And here too, the art scroll tells us turquoise wool. This is the wool dyed with the blood of Chilazon. V'tziva Yoroik. Its color is sea green. As mentioned in tzitzis, as Rashi says, Rashi is consistent that wherever where Torah mentions Techeiles, by Bigdei Kehuna, by the Mishkan, and by tzitzis, it's all of the Chilazon. In relation to the Shittas Rambam, it's questionable because the Rambam, even though the Rambam elaborates in great length extensively in describing the Techeiles by the tzitzis in Hilchos Tzitzis Perek Beis, and there he goes into the detail that the dye, the color, the shade of the dye, and how we have to manufacture the dye, when we inspect the dye, and it has to be made l'shma. Many guidelines found based on the Gemara in Masechta Menachos Daf Mem Beis Amud Beis, and there he tells us clearly that the tzitzis, the Chilazon, the dye of the Techeiles has to be from the Chilazon, and he tells us exactly where the Chilazon is found. It's found in the Yam HaMelech. It's, even though plain the Yam HaMelech would sound like this, the Dead Sea, but definitely they say that that's just a jargon of the Rambam. Yam HaMelech, there's nothing found, nothing living in the Dead Sea, so there's no Chilazon in the Dead Sea. It means the Mediterranean Sea, and they bring proof from that, from the Rambam's responsa, that Rambam himself says that he traveled through the Yam HaMelech, which basically is clear that it's not the Dead Sea, it's not the Yam HaDesdoim, it is the Mediterranean, which we described as the Yam HaMelech. The Mefarshim say that already, even though Rabbi Yankiv Emden in his Sefer Mitpachas Sforim takes issue with this Rambam, and he says there's something very wrong that he says Yam HaMelech, and also I believe the Radal of David Luria also says there's some kind of mistake there, but others already make it, academics and other Gedolei Yisrael explain that the Rambam Shita Yam HaMelech refers to the Mediterranean. We're moving on, whatever the case is, but it's very clear that he tells us the details of the Techeiles from the Chilazon, and he says it in Hilchos Tzitzis. Nevertheless, when we come to Hilchos Klei HaMikdash, and that's where he tells us about the Bigdei Kehuna, he doesn't talk about the Mishkan because it's not continuous, it's not Lederis. So he doesn't describe the Mishkan or the halachas of the Mishkan, and the Yerias and the Paroiches and all that, and the Klei HaMishkan. When he talks about the Bigdei Kehuna, and the Bigdei Kehuna, which is continuous, of course, it's negated to the Beis HaMikdash, and Hilchos Klei HaMikdash Perek Ches, Halacha Yud Gimel, he tells us that the Techeiles has to be a blue dye, but he doesn't mention anything about the Chilazon. And the question is, what is the Rambam's opinion by the Bigdei Kehuna? Do we need the Chilazon, the blue dye from the Chilazon? We can use any blue dye, even though he tells us it has to be that sky blue, but he doesn't mention anything about the Chilazon. And the Mishnah Lamelech immediately on the spot brings it to our attention that the Rambam detailed it in Hilchos Tzitzis. He doesn't say a word about it here, but definitely the Mishnah Lamelech takes it for granted that surely the Rambam's opinion that we need to have the Chilazon, the dye of the Techeiles of the Chilazon, we definitely need it by the Bigdei Kehuna, just as we need it by the Tzitzis. And he says, the Rambam doesn't mention it because he relies on what he detailed in Hilchos Tzitzis, being that Sefer Avodah comes after Sefer Ava, and he says Hilchos Tzitzis comes before Sefer Hilchos Klei HaMikdash. So therefore, that's a general rule in the Rambam. At least he employs this rule in the Rambam, this principle, that where the Rambam detailed something extensively, and then later on he talks in detail, he mentions it again, he doesn't bother detailing the things, that the same rules apply. That's his take. And that also is the take of Rav David Fardo in his commentary Chazdei David on the Tosefta in Menachos Perek Tes Halacha Vav. He says that's also the Shittas Rambam, and I believe he says, if I recall correctly, he says the same thing in the Sefer Minchas. And the Rav David Yosef David Zinsheim, who was the chief rabbi of the Sanhedrin of Napoleon from Paris. There's a lot spoken about him. We mention him from time to time, quite often actually, even though the Alter Rebbe was very dissatisfied with Napoleon and Napoleon's Sanhedrin, but it wasn't up to Rabbi Yosef David Zinsheim to be the Rosh Sanhedrin, if one reads the history about it. So therefore, he's okay, I believe. So his forum, I quoted, I reference them, and we learn them. Anyway, whatever the case is, it's all irrelevant. That's just a sideline off track, and we got to move because it's getting late. It's already 5 to 9. And being that I'm looking at my technician, and he's going to tell me at 9 o'clock that we have to start the Rogatchover, so therefore we're doing all of this before we start the Rogatchover. And 9 o'clock we're going to start the Rogatchover, so we're going to finish at 9:30. I better stop talking about it. Let's just get moving. Okay. So we're done. Well, yeah. So also in the Sefer Yad David, in the Sefer Minchas Ani, which is a Sefer Klolim, so on in the Chelik Beis, on the section of Lehutra, on that section of that entry, there he brings these Rambams, and he also is of the opinion that the Rambam's opinion is that even though he doesn't mention it in Hilchos Klei HaMikdash, nevertheless he relies on what he wrote in Hilchos Tzitzis. But many Achronim disagree. Like, for instance, the Merkavas HaMishnah, the Merkavas HaMishnah in Hilchos Tzitzis makes it very clear in Perek Beis that the Rambam, where he says and describes in detail the union of the Chilazon, that's where he holds, that's where it's needed. But when it comes to the Big Kahuna, there's no need for having the dye, the blue dye from Techeiles. You can use any other kind of blue dye, as long as it stays and it doesn't fade, etc. So that's his take, and he says, being that the Rambam didn't say it in Hilchos Klei HaMikdash, and he doesn't rely on what he says in Hilchos Tzitzis, Dafka, and others want to say, other Achronim, there's a whole, many Achronim discuss it. Others say, if you read Hilchos Tzitzis well, with the Rambam, when he starts talking about the dye from the Chilazon, he mentions a couple of times Tzitzis. In other words, even though it's Hilchos Tzitzis, but he makes it clear that even though we have to have blue dye, wherever Techeiles is mentioned, says the Rambam there, but you should know that the Techeiles of the Tzitzis has to be from the Chilazon. So in Hilchos Tzitzis, he tells you 10 times, a couple of times, that the Techeiles of the Tzitzis have to be from the Chilazon. So there already he alluded to say that possibly it doesn't apply to the Hilchos Klei HaMikdash. This will be relevant because it seems that the Rogatchover's opinion is that to know, and he brings it, the Rogatchover going, will bring a Tosefta in Masechta Menachos, where there's a Tosefta in Masechta Menachos, Perek Tes Halacha Vav, where the Tosefta says Techeiles has to be dafka from the Chilazon. If it is not from the Chilazon, it's possible. So interesting, those who say that it's only needed by tzitzis say that Tosefta is talking about tzitzis, because the fact is the sugya of tzitzis is found in Masechta Menachos. Even though Menachos is talking about kochim, right? Nevertheless, the sugya of tzitzis is in Masechta Menachos. So even though we talk also about other things, Beis Hamikdash and the like, and nevertheless it applies to tzitzis. Some want to say so, but nevertheless the Rogatchover understood that flat statement, that stimas aloshin of the Tosefta, that it applies both to tzitzis and also to the Mishkan and to the Big Kahuna. All right, we're moving on. Let's go on to another nekuda, and let me just share with you this because it's going to be negay also to the Rogatchover, and that is all of this will be negay. The Rogatchover, like I say, seems to accept that even though he mentions that the Rambam doesn't mention it, even though the Rambam, he says, the Rogatchover says, that even though the Rambam doesn't say it in Hilchos Klei HaMikdash, he says it only in Hilchos Tzitzis, and it doesn't say in Hilchos Klei HaMikdash, but then he brings a Tosefta, where in the Tosefta it says that you need it. So I believe the Rogatchover's opinion is that even in Klei HaMikdash you also need the Chilazon. It would seem that's his take. Let's move on. There's another thing we find, and that is we find by 3 different dinim. And that is in the Chumash by the Klei HaMikdash, in the Truma, when Hashem speaks that you should donate. By the way, interesting also, another point, when it says Techeiles, that you have to donate Techeiles. So this, I noticed that Sfas Emes in Masechta Shabbos of Ayin Dalet Beis, page 74b, claims that Techeiles means that they donated the wool which was dyed already. Now, Rashi actually says the Techeiles means that semer, the wool which has been dyed with the dam of the Chilazon. Alrighty, but the Rogatchover Dafka says he brings 3 points. He says when it says Techeiles in the Torah, we can understand it in 3 ways. Techeiles can mean the semer which was dyed already, blue. Techeiles can mean the actual dye, the color, the dye, which we need to use to dye the wool, or it can be the actual Chilazon. So when it says in the Torah Techeiles, he says it, I think, in Parshas Vayakel. Techeiles can mean 3 things, one of 3 things. Techeiles can be, like I said, the wool dyed, it can be the actual dye, or it can be the Chilazon itself, even though the Sfas Emes seems to say it's talking about, like Rashi says clearly, it's talking about the wool which is dyed. Also, again, we're talking in tzitzis. In Parsha Shelach, the Yidden were in the desert. If the Yidden were in the desert, Hashem says to them that you should have the Chilazon, right? And also in the Mishkan, where Hashem says you should have the Techeiles, and it has to be from the Chilazon, what she says. So where is there a Chilazon in the desert? What's going on? How is there a Chilazon in the desert? Well, generally we accept to say that the Chilazon, like the Rambam says in Hilchos Tzitzis, is a type of fish, right? Okay, like the Rambam says before, it's dog. The Gemara says it has the shape of the dog, it has the color of the dog. It doesn't say clearly in the Gemara that it is a fish, but the Rambam says it's a fish, it's found in the water. The Gemara says that it's found in the section of Zvulun. That's the main problem. And it's found in the section of Zvulun, so in Eretz Yisrael, that's the lot of Zvulun. When he got the section, the parcel of land, so Zvulun, in his part, there was what? There was the Chilazon was found. Well, therefore, the Radvaz was asked, when the Gemara says that they seem to trap the Chilazon, the Gemara says in the Sech Shabbos that they trap the Chilazon for the needs of the Mishkan. Asks, so the Radvaz was asked in Chelik Beis, Shabbos Chuvas Radvaz Chelik Beis, Simin 685, if I recall correctly. Tofresh Pei, hey? So the Radvaz was asked, what is the Chilazon doing in the desert? And he says an interesting thing. He says, even though it's found Dafka in the section in Eretz Yisrael, and Yidden were in the desert, and Dafka in the part of Zvulun, nevertheless, he says, when the Yidden were in the desert, it's also found in the Yam Suf, and it was also able to be found in the Yam Suf. He says, at that time in history, it could have been found in the Yam Suf also. And being that it couldn't be found in the Yam Suf and Yidden by Matan Torah, meaning when they were commanded these commandments, they weren't far from the Yam Suf, so therefore they traveled to the Yam Suf and they obtained it. That's the take of the Shabbos Chuvas Haradvaz. Nevertheless, there's an interesting Pnei Yehoshua. The Pnei Yehoshua learns this Gemara in Masechta Shabbos Ayin Daled Amud Beis to tell us that when the Gemara says they trapped the Chilazon, doesn't mean to say they literally trapped it, because it just means to say that if we would have need to trap the Chilazon, in other words, we need Techeiles and we need the dye from the Chilazon. So therefore, all the malachos which we would have needed to implement in the Mishkan, even though we didn't actually, because sowing and planting weren't either in the Mishkan, sowing and threshing, because they didn't sow and thresh in the desert. They had the sowing and threshing only where there was inhabited land in the country, right? Not in the desert. So what we say that these malachas were in the Mishkan? Where was the sowing and threshing in the Mishkan? There's nothing to sow. We're in desert land. So he says that it means that these are such items which we needed in the Mishkan, which we would have need to sow and plant for them. Where did they even have those items? They brought it out from Mitzrayim. So he says the same applies for the Chilazon, that possibly they brought the dye or the Chilazon from Egypt. So they had it with them. And that's the meaning of a Techeiles. Lav Dafka had to be in the actual desert. So says the Pnei Yehoshua and the Sech Shabbos Ayin Dalet. That's a whole separate discussion. Let's move on in the meantime. Okay. Now, going to the Rogatchover Gaon. So just one point before we go to the Rogatchover Gaon. In the donations, what you didn't have to donate, it says they had to bring also the Solas Shoni. Shelach Shoni, so they translate in the English, in the Art Scroll English, scarlet wool. Shelach Shoni, scarlet wool. Rashi says, Shelach Shoni, Rashi says nothing on Shelach Shoni. Shoni means red, that's the way we generally translate it, and Shelach would mean the Shelach Shoni, the red wool, which is coming from the Shelach. We'll soon see exactly where it's coming from in a moment. But the fact is that we find Shni Toilas, we find in the Chumash. Shni Toilas, you'll take out your Chumash and you'll find it in Parshas Mitzorah. In Parshas Mitzorah, when we have to cleanse the Mitzorah and do the ritual purity for the Mitzorah, the Torah mentions that we have to have Ushni Toilas. Correct? So you have it where in Parshas Vayikra. What happened to my Chumash? Excuse me, here's my Chumash right in front of me, excuse me. So we have it in Parshas Mitzorah, those who are interested. So in Parsha Yudalet and Parshas Mitzorah and Pasuk Dalet, it says you should bring a 8 eres ushni solas ve'ezov. Ushni solas, Rashi says, ushni solas, he doesn't tell us exactly what the shni solas is. Rashi says, Loshin shal tzemer, tongue of wool, svua zahoris, which is dyed with a red, fiery red, a sharp red, a bright red. That's Shni Solas, and the Pasuk mentions further on again, Ushni Solas, Eshni Hatolas. That's in Chumash Mitzorah. We find also by the Porah Aduma and Parshas Chukas in Yutes, there too HaKadosh Baruch Hu says that we need, when we're talking about sprinkling the water, etc., the Torah says you should take, the Kohen should take Parsha Yutes, Pasuk Vav, Torah says you should take 8 seres ve'ezim Ushni Solas. Ushni Solas, there's no Rashi there. But I'll call upon him there too. It says Ushni Solas. You hear already that there seems to be something different. Here it says Toilas Shoni, and there it says Ushni Solas. Well, anyway, let me just mention to you as follows. The Rambam in Hilchos Klei Hamikdash, when he talks about the Toilas Shoni, for the Big Corner, the Rambam says, and this dye comes from the Toilas. Toilas. It seems that it's coming from the worm, from the actual worm. And nevertheless, when it comes to Hilchos Parah Aduma, and when it comes to Hilchos Tumas Tzoras, so in Hilchos Tumas Tzoras, the Rambam says as follows, that you should have Oshni Toilas. He doesn't mention any details. But when it comes to Hilchas Parah Aduma, and that is in Hilchas Parah Aduma, Perik Gimel, Halacha Beis, there's a lot of details, and he tells us that you should know that Toilas, the Shni Toilas is as follows. Is Toilas a worm? Generally, we know Toilas is a worm. He says you should know there are red berries, and these red berries have in them small gnats, small worms. That's what the Rambam says. So the question is the dye coming from the worm, which the worm is in these red berries, or the dye is coming from the berry itself? So there's an interesting discussion in the Techeiles-Chilazon Noda B'Yehuda, Erechaim Tinyana Siman Gimel, and it's also this topic is also touched on by the Chassam Sofer in Techeiles-Chilazon Yeridei Siman Reish Ayin Vov, and that is about the Shni Toilas. Firstly, he talks also about the Techeiles, and that is, he queries, is the Techeiles coming from the Chilazon? Is the Chilazon a kosher fish or it's a non-kosher fish? And he says, what's the problem? Because we know, it says, the Gemara says in Masechet Shabbos Daf Chav Chesed, we have to only use kosher items for holy things, right? It has to be from something Torah, only from something kosher, right? So therefore, if that's the case, so the question is, we have to use it for the dye, to dye the different items in the Beis Hamikdash, or for the Mishkan, or for the Bigdei Kehuna. Can you use a dye which is non-kosher from an animal which is not kosher? So there's a whole discussion in the Noda B'Yehuda, and he wants to say maybe dye is different. As long as the substance, the material itself, is a kosher animal, the hide is from a kosher animal, nevertheless, the dye, which is only to embellish whatever the color, just for dye, so dye is not a problem with something non-kosher. So he has a whole discussion about the Chilazon. Is the Chilazon a kosher fish? And he says, according to the Rambam, that it's a fish. It's possibly has fins and scales, so it's a kosher fish. But he says, according to the Rashi, he brings a Rashi, we're going to soon talk about this Rashi in Masechta Sanhedrin, Daf Tzadik Aleph Amud Aleph, and also Rashi in many different places, in Rashi in Masechta, Rashi in different places. Rashi also says that it's a toilas, it's a worm, it's a creature, a land creature. Now, a land creature can't be tar. And also Rashi says that it also crawls. It's some kind of creepy crawly. It crawls on the ground. It seems that it's not kosher. So he says, look, it will depend on Rashi and the Rambam. According to the Rambam, we even dye would have to be a kosher thing possibly. But according to the Rashi, even something non-kosher could also be good enough, even though it's just dye. Right? Because it's only dye and it's not the actual substance. It's getting late. Then, nevertheless, he brings the Rambam further on. Then he goes on to Shni Toilas, and he says, look, the Rambam says in Hilchas Klei HaMikdash that we have the color, the red dye, coming from the Toilas, from the worm. So it seems like the dye can be even something non-kosher. But then he brings the Rambam in Hilchas Parah Aduma, where the Rambam says that it's not coming actually from the actual worm, it's coming from these berries which have worms in them. So it could be, according to the Rambam, it's only coming from the berry, which is kosher, and not from the worm, which is in the berry, which is actually the Shita of Rabbi Bechaya in the beginning of Parshas Truma, where he says that even Shni Toilas, even though we're talking about Toilas and it has worms, nevertheless, the dye is not coming from the worm. And this Rabbi Bechaya is discussed in many different places, quoted by the Chassam Sofer and Techeiles-Chilazon Siman Lametes, and and also discussed in the Sefer Nachal Gedumim, in extensively in Sefer Nachal Gedumim from the Chido and Parshas Truma. And like I say, lengthy discussions about this Rabbi Bechaya, and some want to say that's also the opinion of the Rambam, because the Rambam, it's actually a Rashi in Yeshaya, Kapitel Aleph, in Tanakh Yeshaya, where Rashi also says if your sins will be red, fiery red. So Rashi says, so Rashi says in Yeshaya, Chelik Aleph, Perik Aleph, Pasuk Yud Ches, Rashi says also that these are the gargarim, they're such, so to speak, such berries which they have worms in them. So again, like I see, so they want to say, some want to interpret, that's Rabbi Zcharia, the Sechemet brings in Chanukah, Nasifas Dinim in Chanukah from Rabbi Yosef Zcharia Stern, a Rav in Shabel, one of the three big cities in Lithuania, Shabel. He was a great Gaon, and he wrote Shabbos Shuvah Zecher Yehoshua, some of his commentary on Shir Hashirim. He quotes this Rashi and also the Rambam, and he seems to want to quote the Rashi, and he seems to want to learn that the dye is not from the actual worm; it's coming only from the berry, like Rabbi Bechaya learns, and that's the way the Noda B'Yehuda or Yehuda, who also wants to learn this Rambam. So again, you see, there are two ways to learn the Techeiles. Is it kosher? Is it non-kosher? And can you use it? There are two ways to learn the shani, the Tolah shani, is it actually the worm or it's only the berries from the worm? So like I said, there are two opinions in relation to the shani. It would seem the shita of the shita of the Rabbi Yehuda's son, it's his son, and also the shita of that's the shita of Rabbi Yehuda's son, and also the Minchas Chinuch Mitzvah Tzadik Tes seems to accept that even though the Rambam says in Klei Amigdash it's the Teilas, because he says later on in Parah Adumah that it's coming, that there are berries, and in the berries there are worms, so it's possible, according to the Rambam, it's not coming actually from the worms. So therefore, that's the discussion. Can you use for something which is of dye, can you use something kosher or non-kosher? But now, the Rogatchover Gaon is definitely of the opinion that the Techeiles Shoni is something of a living species. And he brings a Talmud Yerushalmi in Masech Techeiles, Perek Tes Halacha Aleph, where in Masech Techeiles it says just like the Shni Techeiles is Ruach Chaim, so therefore all the dyes have to come from Ruach Chaim. So according to many Mefarshim, this is referring not just to the Shelach Shoni, but this is referring, so surely the Shelach Shoni is something from something living. So that proves that it's not coming from the berry, which has in it something living. It's actually coming, the dye, it's coming from the Techeiles, from the actual worm. That's number one. Number two, that's what the Rogatchover quotes this in the Chassidus. And it seems that the Rogatchover's opinion is also based on this Talmud Yerushalmi, that the same goes for the Chilazon. That in other words, it applies also to the Techeiles, that that it has to be dafka from the Chilazon, from the living being. Actually, Rabbi Arik from Torah, in his glosses, in his Hagois, in Tal Torah and Talmud Yerushalmi, brings his Talmud Yerushalmi to disprove Rabbeinu Bechai. Rabbeinu Bechai says it's coming from the berries, and it's clear from this Talmud Yerushalmi that it's not dafka from the berries. It has to be dafka from a Ruach Chaim, something living, so it's coming from the Techeiles. Even though I believe that Rabbi Arieli in a Sefer Einaim LaMishpat, the Masechta Sanhedrin, quotes this Yerushalmi, and he wants to say that it's not dafka muchrach from the Talmud Yerushalmi, but Lamaisa Rabbi Arik says that Rabbeinu Bechai is disproven from this Talmud Yerushalmi. So that's the shita of the Rogatchover Gaon, that even the last Shani is a living creature, and you'll soon see why the Rogatchover has to learn that it's a living creature. Let's go straight to the Rogatchover Gaon, because it's already 10 past, the quarter past. And here we go. So I've sent out sheets, right? And the sheets read as follows. Let's go directly to what the Rogatchover quotes with Safra. The Safra talks in Mitzvah, where we mention Ushni Techeiles. So it says there, Ushni, Yochel Pikis. It says Ushni, it has to be red. So red can be, and the Mefarshim say, what does Pikis mean? Pikis means, it's a Lashon HaGemara which is found, it means rouge, right? Women's makeup. It can be any type of red. So the Gemara says maybe the wool can also be dyed with any type of dye, any type of red. Salman Gloimer Techeiles, says the Safra, says the Techeiles, it has to be dafka from the worm. Says the Gemara, Techeiles, says the Safra, Yochel Echad Menat Tzvoim, because when the Techeiles, secretion of the Techeiles, or you squeeze it when it dies, so it has the very red blood, and then there's different shades of blood. Some is darker, and some is lighter, and some is brighter, right? When you take an insect. So immediately it'll be either very dark or very bright, and then slowly it ends up fading. The color red is not so strong. So that's what the Gemara says. Yochel, the Brisa says, Yochel Echad Menat Tzvoim. I would think any shade of the red blood. Talmud Leimar Vishoni. It says Ushni Techeiles. Haketzad. So therefore, the first opinion says Zuzah Hoiris Toiv. That has to be the very bright red of the Techeiles. That's the first opinion in this Safra, the Techeiles. Then it says Yechanan ben Dahavo Yomer. Yechanan ben Dahavo, he says Ushni Techeiles. It means Sheni Shebet Techeiles. Sheni Shebet Techeiles. And basically, the Mefarshim explain, because they bring proof from Tanakh that Techeiles itself means red. Toileya would mean red. They bring different psukim from Tanakh. Those who are know Tanakh will find the psukim. I'm not going to quote for you the psukim now, but there are psukim. If you want dafka, I'll quote the psukim for you. It's a pasuk dafka. Let me quote it for you to make you happy. It's a pasuk in Yeshaya Aleph. It says in Yadimu Katoila, right? A mefurish pasuk. Yadimu, it will be red Katoila. So we know that pasuk. Then there's a pasuk in Nachum Beis Dalet. It says Anshe Chayil Mitlaim. So it's also red. That's quoted some Mefarshim. So Toleya already means red. So what is Shni Techeiles? What's it mean, red and red? So he says Sheni. Therefore he darshans Shni Techeiles. Shni, don't read as if it's written Shni, which means red. Shni means sheni shebeteilas. It doesn't have to be the fiery red. It doesn't have to be the bright red. Even it's a fading red. It's not. So the first opinion says it has to be the bright red. It has to be the bright red. The second opinion says it's sheni shebeteilas. This is the way, more or less, the Mefarshim learn. It's Rab Shamsha Mishantz, the Rash Mishantz, the Ravid, and also the Malbim, and also the different other Mefarshim, the Karban Aaron. Each one learns more or less the gist of their pirush is more or less the same. Like I say, these different Rishonim and also the Achronim, the Karban Aaron, the Asir Sefer, the Kamarna in his commentary, and like I said, and also Rabbeinu Hillel, one of the Rishonim, they all seem to learn the same, that's the meaning of Sheni Shabbataylas, the second stage. Well, some say the second stage of the actual worm, of the blood of the actual worm, the one which is like faded, not the bright red, or it means that even if you had already the dye from the bright red, but if it's sitting around and it was used already for something else, you can use it again. For this, that's the second stage, which makes it's faded. Okay, so that's the first, this is this is what the Tosefta writes. But the Rogatchover has a very interesting take in interpreting this Sheni Shebeteilas. So even though they all read Sheni Shebeteilas like we explained it, the Rogatchover also will read Sheni Shebeteilas, but he has a total different understanding and an analysis of the Sheni Shebeteilas. And here we go. He then brings to our attention the next reference. It says there's a Tosefta Masechta Menachos. Now it says Zucker Mandel, and that is a known individual who published the Tosefta. It's known as the edition of Zucker Mandel, and the only reason I copied and cut and paste Zucker Mandels is because the Bari Lan disc only has Zucker Mandel's Tosefta, and I didn't want to quote the Zucker Mandel ones because it's quite problematic, as you'll soon see in a moment. Let's read the Zucker Mandel's text. So it says as follows: Techeiles and Shere and the Tosefta says in Masechta Menachos, Techeiles and Shere elam in Techeiles-Chilazon. Techeiles, it addresses Techeiles, and it's only kosher. It's from the Chilazon. Heavy shalom in Techeiles-Chilazon sula, but if you bring it, if it's not from the Chilazon, it's possible. Now listen to the way the text reads here. The way the text reads here, it says Shin Nun with an apostrophe. How do you always read Shin Nun with an apostrophe? It means Shenema. Right? Anybody who knows how to read a text will read the text that way, correct? Shenema. And if that's the case, you would read Shenemar, and you would read as follows. Listen, Shenemar Toilas. That means Mina Toilas Shebahorim. You have to bring, the Chilazon is the Toilas, is a worm, and it's a worm on the mountain, it's a mountain worm. And if you bring it from the Chilazon, from anything else but besides the mountain worm, it's possible. That's the way you would read this text. Guess what? Because some read this text this way, and this is actually quoted in the gloss of Rabbi Menachem Kasher and Shabbos Shuvas Divrei Menachem. So there was a professor, he wrote a sefer called Kadmoniyos HaTalmud. Kadmoniyos HaTalmud was written by a professor, Dr. Shmuel Kreuz, in Berlin and Vienna. It was published in the 1920s. He wrote a sefer Kadmoniyos HaTalmud, and he quotes this Zucker Mandel's text, okay? And after him, in a publication which was published in Yerushalayim in the 20s, up to the 20s, from between the 20s and the 30s and the 40s. So there was in Yerushalayim, there was a publication called Hecht. Anyway, so there's a Yid there, an academic, Hirschberg, and he quotes this professor, Dr. Shmuel Kreuz's text of the Talmud Yerushalmi, and with this he wants to refute the whole thesis of the Radziner Rebbe, because the Radziner Rebbe claimed that it's the inkfish and it's coming from the water, and it's coming from the sea, and he says, look, I've before the Tosefta, that it says it's a mountain worm. Shanamar, Toilas, not Toilas Shebahorim. Well, anyway, let me let you know that Professor Shaul Lieberman already, he makes reference to this Tosefta. There's a sefer of Shaul Lieberman, besides his, he wrote a Pirush Tosefta Kipshuta, right on the Tosefta. So Rav Shaul Lieberman wrote also a sefer called Tosefes Rishonim. And it's a fabulous sefer. And actually, Rabbi Lezer Duvid, those who were in Melbourne, remember, maybe he was in Sydney too, I don't know. Rabbi Lezer Duvid Friedman, Rabbi Lezer Duvid told me, advised me to buy the Tosefes Rishonim for Rav Shaul Lieberman. Yes, he did. And after Rav Shaul Lieberman in Masechta Menachos in volume 2, on page 258, he quotes this text. He said there's a big major mistake here. and it's a severe mistake. He says the way it is published in the Zuckermandel edition, and it says Shin Nun with an apostrophe, you can read it Shenemar. And if you read it Shenemar, you seem to identify the Chilazon with the mountain worm. He says, forget it. It's so wrong. It really should read Shin Nun Yud. Shin Nun Yud. You get it? It's not Shenemar, Shin Nun with an apostrophe. It was supposed to be a Yud. You get it? And all your standard Toseftas, take out your standard Tosefta, which we have today. It doesn't say Shin Nun with an apostrophe. It's Shin Nun Yud. In other words, the Tosefta is addressing two things. One thing is addressing the Techeiles, then it's addressing the Techeiles Shoni. You get it? It's addressing the dye of the Techeiles, then it's addressing the dye of the red dye. So the two messages. And in other words, one message is Techeiles and Ikshera Element Achilazon, Heavy Shalom Nachilazon Psula. That's one message. Another message is Shoni, Shni, Techeiles. What does Shni Techeiles mean? Says the Tosefta, it has to be Minat Techeiles Shabahorim. Has to be from the worm from the mountains. Heavy Shalom Minat Techeiles Shabahorim Psula. If he brings it not of the mountain, the worm not from the mountain, it is possible. That's what it says in the Tosefta. Now, what is the meaning of this Tosefta in relation? So it's very clear, number one, the Rogatchover quotes this Tosefta to say that you see clearly that you need Dafka the dye from the Chilazon, and he learned that this Tosefta is addressing and relating to the Big Dikun and the Mishkan. Okay, that's number one. Number two, here we come to a new rule, new halacha, that the Shni Techeiles, if Techeiles means a worm, it means it has to be the Techeiles on the mountain. And therefore, Meforshim say we don't find that the Rambam should mention it has to be Techeiles Shabahorim. Actually, the Samech, when the Rambam says in Hilchos Klei Hamikdash Perek Ches Halacha Yud Gimel, the Rambam says it has to be from the Techeiles. He says Nun Beis. In other words, P.S. It has to be from the Techeiles Shabahorim. And the Samech, I'm finishing. And the Samech quotes this Tosefta. So that's, and others wonder. And the Rogatchover also makes point that the Rambam doesn't mention the Horim. Nevertheless, the Tosefta definitely says it has to be Shabahorim. Now the Rogatchover, listen to what the Rogatchover says. The Rogatchover, when it comes to this Techeiles Shabahorim, the Rogatchover says, where do we know that you need a Techeiles Shabahorim, the worm dafka? It says in the Torah, Shni Techeiles. And the Tosefta says it has to be Shabahorim from the mountain. Now, interesting, Rab Chatzkel Abramsky, in his commentary on the Tosefta, he says it seems like it's a halacha l'moshe misinai. He doesn't know any source for it. He says just like there are many halachas l'moshe misinai, it's halacha l'moshe misinai, it has to be Shabahorim. The Chazdei David, he says that why does it have to be dafka from the mountains? He says because the dye comes from the berries, and the berries, when they're on the mountain, so they're much because of the sun, so that brings out the brightness of the red. He says that's why it has to be from the mountains. And he accepts this opinion that it's not actually from the worm. The Rogatchover learns Techeiles means the actual worm. And he says if it's the actual worm, and actually that's where he quotes also the Talmud Yerushalmi, what we mentioned a moment ago, where it says it has to be a Ruach Chaim, it has to be a living being, so it's not the berries, it's the actual Techeiles. But the Rogatchover says, what does the Tosefta know to say that it has to be actually from the mountain? It's a mountain worm. Says the Rogatchover, the Rogatchover is going to put the puzzle together and explain the Safra, which we mentioned a moment ago, the Sheni Shebeteilas, a most fascinating pirush, and also the meaning why it has to be the Techeiles from the mountain, and he's going to explain it with the Gemara and Talmud Bavli. Let's learn the Gemara together. The Gemara says in Masechtas Haradin Tzadik Aleph Amud Aleph, this apostate said to Rabami, I'm reading to you fellows say, Yidden say, that Hashem will resurrect the dead, the Shach V'chaya, that the dead will be resurrected. He says, how can it be Afra, the dust, that turned to dust, Afra Mikochaya, how can dust be resurrected? Dust is dust. So the Gemara says, Rabami, this the Gemara has a lot to say, and in conclusion, the Gemara says, you know what? Rabami says to this apostate, go up to the mountain, and you'll see that today, you'll only see one Chilazon on the mountain, and tomorrow you'll see, after it rains, the whole mountain is full of Chilazons, full of Chilazons. That's what the Gemara says. So what is he basically conveying to him? He says, look what's happening. Let me just, excuse me. So he says, look, you see overnight, hocus pocus. You're saying, how can dust be resurrected? Look, there's no Chilazon, there's one Chilazon today. Tomorrow you'll see the whole mountain full of Chilazonis. So you see that if it can be all of a sudden out of the blue, hocus pocus, full of Chilazonis, and that's, the whole mountain is full of Chilazons, so B'meila, that proves to you that things can happen like that overnight. So Hashem can resurrect the dead from the dust. That's what the Gemara says. Now Rashi says, what are we talking about? Listen to what Rashi says. Rashi says, that we're looking at the Rashi. Look at the page, please. Rashi says Chilazon. What is Chilazon? Techeiles, Rashi says it's a worm, which comes out of the sea, once in 70 years. Once in 70 years, that's what the Gemara says, that it's oile once in 70 years. The Gemara doesn't say it's oile min hayam once in 70 years. Rashi adds that it comes out from the sea once in 70 years, and we die with its blood, Techeiles. Now Rashi says, you alone see one chilazon on the mountain. Further, the Gemara Rashi, the whole mountain will become full of chilzonis. So what does Rashi say? Rashi says it's coming from the eggs. They're hatched immediately. The eggs from this from the first chilazon, and they're hatched immediately. My Rebbe says Rashi holds that it comes from the Beit Chilazon. It's the eggs which are hatched overnight from the first chilazon. Alma, so what do we see from the Yesh Biyodi Alachis Lefisha? We see that Hashem could create something overnight. Hocus pocus, chick chack, things can happen. So therefore you're asking, how can it be Hashem should resurrect the dead, chick chack? It doesn't take a long period of time. I'll show you, things can happen overnight. So here too, it can happen immediately. Now, the Yad Rameh takes issue. You notice there's a Yad Rameh, that's Rameir Halevi Abulafia. He's from Spain, one of the great sages going back 800 years ago approximately. So he says, he brings the Rashi, and then he says, he says, I don't like the Pshat of Rashi. Why? Because for many reasons, he says, what's the Chilazon who's supposed to be in the sea doing on the mountain, right? What's it doing on the mountain? And then you say the whole mountain becomes full of chilzonos. He says, and if it's coming from the rain, he says, what's the proof? Maybe the rain, the clouds swallowed up from the sea. The clouds swallowed up from the sea. Those chilzonos, and that's why it comes down overnight. So he says, that's that. And then he says, what are you saying? It's coming from nowhere. It's maybe coming from the sea, which the clouds swallowed. That's number one. Number two, he says, what are you proving the apostate from something which happens once in 70 years, right? Once in 70 years. How can you prove him something which happens once in 70 years? In other words, and like the Be'er Sheva elaborates, right? What you want to prove to him something, you have to prove to him something which is he's able to identify with. Who says he'll be the lucky one to notice this chilazon crawling up to the mountain, and overnight he'll see all of them happening, and he says, come, let me show you. It's only happening once in 70 years. So how can we learn that it's referring to this chilazon? Therefore, he concludes, the Yad Rameh concludes that the chilazon is not talking about the chilazon of the Techeiles. It's a total different creature. There's a chilazon which is in the water. That's not discussed. This is not referred to in our Gemara. But the chilazon here is talking about a total different chilazon, which is Taka created. It's a creature, a land creature, and it's not coming. It's coming. It's created. It comes from the dust and the water, and from that the apostate was proven. But it's not proven from the chilazon, which we have the dye of the Techeiles. That's also the take of the Be'er Sheva, and they say it's all based on the girsa of the text of the Orach. We have to really go quickly now because we have 3 minutes left. I hope Menshi is going to give me another 5 minutes. Okay. So the Yad David reconciles this. The Yad David says that the reason, and also the Be'er Sheva mentions, why is it so expensive? Look, the whole mountain gets full of chilzonos according to Rashi. So why is it so expensive? So the Yad David says, listen, the reason why it's expensive is only once in 70 years. So even though there's so many. But anyway, that's the issue. So some have issues with the Pirush Rashi. Like I say, these Rishonim, based on the Aruch, it's the Yad Rameh, Gizachronim, the Be'er Sheva, based on the Girsas Aruch. I can't now, there's a lot of interesting stuff about the Aruch because it's late, we can't discuss it. The Rogatchover definitely takes Rashi at face value. And Rashi makes it very clear that we have a chilazon which comes out from the sea and goes up to the mountain. Okay, you get it? And what happens? There's the initial chilazon, which is coming up from the sea. But then you have loads of chilzonos, which are hatched from the eggs of the initial chilazon. Correct? Good. Okay, and this is actually substantiated very clearly. Where do we find this whole principle to substantiate this? In Beis Ephraim, Shalosh Shuvas Beis Ephraim from our Ephraim Zalman Margolius, in his Shalosh Shuvas Beis Ephraim Archaim Semechaf, he brings a Mefurshi Gemara Masechta Megillah, where Zvulun cries to Hashem, "Why are you giving me? You give me seas, and He gave all my brethren the lot. He got married to Israel. Me giving seas and water, and they got lands. You giving them fields and vines." And You're giving me mountains and hills. Hashem says, Amim, Har Yikro, Sham Yizbucho Zivchei Tzedek, all the nations, all the Shvatim will come on, they'll all need you. What will they need you for? They're going to need you for the Chilazon. Says the Gemara Masechet Megillah Daf Vav, and Rashi says exactly now what happens there. It comes out of the sea, the same thing he says here, and it crawls onto the mountain. Okay? So the Rogatchover Gaon says, and this is all based actually, Rabbi Kiva Eger, and also the native Yehuda we mentioned before, and Simon Gimel, and Rechaim, Jonas Simon Gimel, and Rabbi Kiva Eger brings a Rashi in Masechet Menachos Daf Mendal Adamad, where Rashi says it's oilam min haaretz, it comes out of the ground, it doesn't come from the sea. Well, let me let you know that even though that's the way they learn, so they seem to find that Rashi is contradicting himself, but the Beis Ephraim himself says oilam min haaretz means it's coming from the seabed. So Rashi definitely says the initial chilazon is coming from the sea. According to the Rashi, oilam min haaretz, it means from the seabed. Okay, we're moving on. Listen to clearly what the Rogatchover says. So the Rogatchover is bechadash a chidush gadol. Here we have from this Gemara a very clear thing. We have a chilazon which is coming from the water, from the sea. Then we have chalzonos, which are hatched on the har, on the mountain. And that's the second stage. There's a one stage, the initial stage. That's the initial chilazon coming out of the water. Then there's stage 2, which are hatched from the eggs, which are coming on the mountain. Okay? Says the Rogatchover, listen carefully to what he says. Listen carefully to what he says. The reason, he says the Rogatchover, the one which is suitable for the Techeiles is only the initial one. Because Rashi keeps on saying the chilazon sha'olam min hayam, and from its blood you make the Techeiles. Rashi says the Techeiles is made from that initial chilazon which is coming out of the yam. From there you make the Techeiles. And Rashi actually says this in many other places, with many other Rashis. In the Shas, there's a Rashi in Masechet Metzidas HaMechalaf HaMed Beis, where he says olam min haaretz, also the Rashi in Megillah which we mentioned, and other Rashis, etc., where Rashi says that the one which is olam min haaretz, the one which is olam min hayam, that's the one you make the Techeiles from. That's the one you make the dye from. But even though there's so many other chalzonos, I'm finishing. I'm finishing. Give me another 2 minutes. The minute says the Rogatchover going as follows. The Rogatchover says that the first chilazon, which is olam min hayam, that's the one you make the dye from. That's the Techeiles from the chilazon, which is kosher for the chilazon, and all other chalzonos are apostle, right? So that's the lashon, and his lashon is in sorry, and he says so. Actually, someone once discussed with me, and he says, "You really think the Rogatchover meant what he's saying?" But let me tell you, the Rogatchover says in his commentary on the Rambam and Hilchos Ube'emes, and it's not whatever the Rogatchover says, Ube'emes, he means it for real. He's for real, and the Rogatchover says it 3 times. I found it in the Sfarim. It's found in the Masechet Sanhedrin. It's found also in the Rambam and Hilchos Days, and it's found also in his commentary on Masechet on Parshas Metzora. So in his commentary, he says, therefore, as follows. He says, what's kosher for the chilazon is only the initial chilazon, which is noiled min hayam. Okay? The other ones, which are noiled from the har, that's toilas. Rashi says, what is the chilazon? It's a toilas. It's a worm, right? But it's a worm which comes out from the river, from the sea, onto the mountain. But then there are many chilzonos which are on the mountain. That's the toilas shoni. You know what shoni means? Shani. There's a shani toilas. There's a second stage of the worm, and that is the worm of the mountain. Let's go back to the text. Let's go back. Listen to the text. Ushni toilas, says Rashi, says the Tosefta, the Techeiles-Chilazon, back to the Tosefta. Sheni shebetoilas. So everybody will learn Sheni shebetoilas means the second stage, the second rate of blood. In other words, not the shiny blood, but even the faded blood. The Rogatchover says Sheni shebetoilas means the second worm. There's the first worm which comes out of the sea. That's not the Shni toilas. The Shni toilas is the Sheni shebetoilas. It's the toilas is the second chilazon which is hatched on the mountain, as Rashi says in the Masechet Sanhedrin, Tzadik Aleph Amud Aleph. And that's the meaning what it says in Tosefta, that you have to bring toilas shebahorim. You have to bring for Shni toilas the worm on the mountain. So the question arose: what kind of mountain and what kind of worm on the mountain? The mountain worm? Yes. It's talking about the toilas shebahorim. That is what is hatched from the initial chilazon, from the eggs of the initial chilazon. That is the toilas shebahorim. That, and Rashi says, is a toilas. So basically what we're saying is, according to the Rogatchover, it comes out as follows. That's why the Rogatchover makes it clear. That's why Well, the kach lonu ein lonu. The Rogatchover makes a statement, and I says possibly he's negating this whole shita of identifying the dye, the chilazon nowadays, because we don't know how to differentiate between the initial blood, the dye of the initial chilazon, and the dye of the chilazon on the mountain. They all seem to have, according to the Rogatchover, the same dye. The babies, right? They're hatched from the initial chilazon. So the initial chilazon, that's the kosher one because it's coming out of the sea, right? It's oila, achas l'shivim shana. That's kosher for the what? For the Techeiles. But the shni toilas means sheni toilas. It's the second worm. It is the second group. It's the kids. It's the descendants from the first one. So even though the color is the same, but because the color is the same, that makes it problematic for us to work out what is the true chilazon, which is kosher for the Techeiles, for the tzitzis, and the Beis Hamikdash, and the big kahuna. That's why Omnu says the Rogatchover Lakach Lonu Ein Lonu Machmas Kishemu Hu Abeis. We don't know what to do. We can't identify it. We can't see, even though we see it happen. We see a bunch of chilazon around, but we can't use it because we don't know if it's the chilazon is from the first or the rest. And that's the meaning of Shein Shebetelas. It means the second worm. That's the meaning of the worm on the mountain. Now, not in vain. The Ramendel Kasher in his Miluyim in volume 22 to the Torah Shlem, I'm finishing, and also a Yid, an Einikel from Rabbi Shia where he pens a letter in Tofresh Tzadik Dalet in 1934. This was found in the Yeshiva University Library, and it's been republished, reprinted in a Sefer HaZikaron from Rav Avram Shapiro, the chief rabbi of Yerushalayim. It printed in his Sefer HaZikaron. So on page 328, they publish a letter from this Yid, who was a Rav in Kutna. He was a grandchild of Rabbi Shila Kutna, and he writes to the Rogatchover Gaon Yankiv Shlita. He writes to the Rogatchover, I saw your commentary on Mesechta, on Hilchas Tzitzis, and you say that the Telah Sheba Horim is taka a living, we're talking Shni Telah is taka a living worm, but it's a living worm on the mountain. And what mountain are we talking about? That's the descendants, the ones which are hatched from the initial chilazon. He says, how can you say so? Because the chilazon, the initial chilazon, its dye is blue, right? The chut hashani, the shni toilas, and the hashani we know is red. So how can that be? According to you, it's the same color. The tzibet chelis yikasher toilas hashani do odom. In other words, he understood that it says in the Torah toilas hashani or shni toilas, it got to be red, and we understand all throughout. Everybody learned it's red, or others say it's orange, whatever. The Torah Mendel Kasher brings many different definitions. But to say that if they're hatched from the eggs of the first chilazon, it's according to that, it comes out that it's problematic. They seem to have the same color. And it says clearly, he says, so he says, it's mamish peladik. How can you say such a pshat? That's what he asks in the Rogatchover going. I said, I say Rav Kasha asked the same shaila. And I once said this year, I think an individual, I know who he is, I don't want to name him, but I think the fellow knows, he asked me the question at the time. I said to him that possibly there are different shades of blue. In other words, the father, right, has the real bright Techeiles, and the other ones are not. According to the Rogatchover, they're not identifiable. They're very close to each other. You wouldn't be able to identify it. So therefore, according to the Rogatchover, we talk possibly maybe you have to work out exactly what the Shni Telas is, if it is hatched from those eggs of the initial one. Is this a kosher animal or not? According to Rashi, because it comes out of the sea, that crawls onto the earth, under the ground. There's a Chuvas Marsham in Simin Techeiles-Chilazon Lamadei from the Berjan Rav Techeiles-Chilazon Lamadei. He discusses according to the way Rashi identifies it, that it's even though it's a telas, but it's coming out of the sea and then onto the earth, onto the ground. If it's crawling, if it is a kosher animal or not, even though it seems to be a sea creature, but then it comes out onto the ground, so it's questionable. Like I say, there he discusses it how it is la halacha. He wants to end up saying that possibly no argument between Rashi and the Rambam, because it seems that what the Rogatchover is saying based on Rashi, he wants to say it in the Rambam, because the Rambam says clearly that the chilazon is the fish, right? The fish from the water. And that can follow with the Rashi, because Rashi says that it's a fish, something coming out of the water, and only the initial one is good for the chilazon. And that may identify what the Rambam says, and that's why the Rogatchover going says the Pirush Rashi in the Rambam in Hilchas Tzitzis. With this, we end up a wonderful night. L'chaim v'levracha. Yashikoyah for coming, and Yashikoyah for having, and thank you very much, Menchi, for organizing this evening. A gute Nacht, l'chaim v'levracha.
Gute Nacht.